Hello, I'm Véronique Wiesinger. I was asked to say a few words of introduction about myself. I've been a curator for 25 years, and I've been the director of the Giacometti Foundation for the past 8 years. I must say I've agreed to be in this project because it brings me to a topic that has probably been the reason for me becoming a curator, and it's probing the boundaries of the mind. When you study art, it's so important to explore this subject. So this is why I'm here, and I've been delighted to meet with Hugo, and I hope that this conversation will be to the level of the ones we've already had.
So I'm Hugo Lagercrantz, and I will have this dialogue with Véronique. And my background is that I'm both a neurobiologist, neuroscientist, and a child doctor, a pediatrician. And I've been working, as you heard, with preterm babies. And what intrigues me is when ensoulment starts. When does the infant become conscious and aware of the environment, or does it, according to the Pope, ensoulment starts at conception? But I don't believe in that. But then, probably maybe 25th week, and I will discuss that. But the main interesting question is the heart problem. And the heart problem, what is that? That's the hump from what's happening at an ion channel or neurochemical level, the hump to subjectivity. And we don't understand with that. We cannot, it's very difficult to reduce, for example, how we experience a painting or by Vermeer or music by Chopin, and to reduce that to what's happening at a membrane level. But I think it's very intriguing, because there must be something behind this. Already in the 19th century, the naturalists talked about that you could reduce love to sugar and hate to vitriol, but yet we don't know the mechanism. And that's the reason why I think it's very intriguing with dialogue with an expert on arts.
I'm not exactly an expert on art, Hugo. I don't want to be called an expert on art. I hate expertise in art, to tell the truth. I will just make a few words about Giacometti. I am here as the director of the Giacometti Foundation, and I was asked to make this essay about the boundaries of the mind of Giacometti, but it's of course from my own perspective. So when I was talking to Hugo about the boundaries of the mind, it's obvious that what we look for in art is also to better understand ourselves. And I think he has a lot to tell us now about the objective and the subjective perception. And I would like you to say a few words about that. Because if one thing is certain about Giacometti is that he was trying to convey an objective view of what he was subjectively seeing. And this is what he tried to do all his life. So what have you to say about this, Hugo?
No, I think the child, and you have a kind of a drive. You want to know the truth. Jean-Pierre Chanchet has written a book, The Physiology of the Truth. A 4-year-old child wants to know what's going on exactly, and actually, we as adults and maybe also children, we want to see the truth. We want to see the reality, how the world exists. But maybe it's better seen on a painting or a figure than in real life. So I think when we see this, for example, the sculptures by Giacometti, we get also a stimulation of the reward center in the brain. We get a dopaminergic kick, and when we see this.
But is it possible to represent objectively what is a subjective vision?
That's the hard problem. I'm coming back to the hard problem all the time, and I guess we cannot find a solution of this. There are several conferences between neuroscientists and philosophers, and the only thing they talk about is the hard problem of qualia, as I said, and it's very difficult. Just giving you an example, for example, can we make a zombie, for example, to like arts? Can he enjoy looking on Giacometti? I don't think so. You can certainly make a zombie as a very good chess player or whatever. But just to give an example from the philosopher John Searle, you can make a zombie or a robot who reminds you when your mother-in-law has a birthday, and also sends an SMS or an email to the flower shop, so your mother-in-law will get the flowers. But if the robot forgets, if it doesn't work, when you forget to send the flowers to your mother-in-law, you have subjective feeling which the robot never feels. So that's the hump, really, in a very little comic way to explain it.
May I take a few examples that I have reproduced in the book? For instance, Giacometti saw people standing in front of him melded into space. So you can see a good example, even though the reproduction is not exactly as I would have liked it, but it's on page 158. And you see how the space is melding and entering the figure, and how the figure is itself melding into space. So that is one example. Second example is on page 162, and this is another not very good reproduction, but it's the portrait of a man, any man. It is how he saw people when he looked at them for a long, long time. And then he saw what made them alike any other person. And this is this anonymous portrait that is really revolutionary, to my opinion. And another example is on page 164, and there Giacometti tried to draw the relationship he saw when he looked at any given scene or even scenery in nature, of the link that existed, that he saw, physically saw, between objects. So do you have an explanation for this, Hugo?
It's quite interesting that you receive all the information when you look on a painting or whatever. You get it's millions of bytes, but actually only a few percentage of these bytes actually reach the cortex, where you, in the brain, where you process the impressions. So when you see something, for example, a portrait of a man, like on page 164, the brain adds a lot of things. You have already, the brain is programmed to get it together, because actually you need only to see a few signals or a few details of a face or whatever, and you don't need to see all the details. So that's the brain is working completely different than as a television with all the pixels, because only a few of the pixels actually reach the brain, and that's the reason why it's so interesting to look on these paintings or sculptures, because you add a lot of things and make your own view of how it looks like, and it's probably also a little different from person to person.
Another thing that Giacometti tried to make visible in his work was the sense of time and duration, because he had this uncanny gift that he could see things changing in front of his eyes, when usually we tend to look at things and see them as a sequence of stills. But he saw things, the entropy in things and how they deteriorated with time. How is it possible that someone becomes so conscious, clear? Do you know?
Sorry, I was interrupted here, but...
Okay, I will make it maybe clear. When he looked at an apple, he saw the apple as a living thing that was rotting also, ripening and rotting. So he saw the sense of time in the person or the object. He saw the past, the accumulated past, and the present as a duration. This is not something that is very common. How can we get to this level of consciousness?
I think this is an interesting point, because what is characteristic for human consciousness, which was pointed out already by Henri Bergson, is that what you are mainly thinking of is what has passed and what are you going to do. A child is thinking of what's happening now in this situation, but an adult usually always refer to what he sees or she sees to what has happened and what is going to happen. So that's a kind of inner monologue, and I think that's very important when for your impressions.
Can you tell me more about how this inner monologue relates to the sense of time passing in living beings?
I didn't get your question because I couldn't hear.
Can you tell me how the inner monologue relates to the sense of time passing in living beings, not only human but all living beings?
Yes, I think you have a constant inner monologue. William James talked about the stream of consciousness. And actually, now we can visualize the inner monologue, and I will show that. We have most of the energy which goes to the brain, and the brain consumes a lot of energy, glucose, 50% of all the glucose in the infant brain. And what you thought, the previous idea was that this energy is going to solve a problem or so, but no, most of the energy to the brain is for this inner monologue. And you can see this on page 163 and comparing an infant with an adult. And the adult is continuously having this activity between different hubs. And you can also see it in children, but I think the difference is that the adult is always referring to something what's happening and what's going to happen. So with this inner monologue, he or she may fill in the lack of information, and I think this is also maybe of importance for the interpretation, for example, of a sculpture. Do you see what I mean?
Do you think children have a real perception of the present time, the idea of being present, the now and here?
Awareness of being present. The child or the adult in general, yeah, certainly I think so. I think awareness is one part of consciousness. Did I understand your question correctly, or?
No, it seems to me, but I may be wrong, that it takes a lot of effort to become really aware of here and now and not projecting into the future or the past.
Yeah, maybe you are right. Yeah, certainly.
And I have another question to ask you. You're talking about the intake of sugar that is necessary to the brain. So I was wondering why some people need to fast to be able to create. Like Giacometti, for instance. He was probably not eating very well. And he stayed very, very late at night working, which is probably why he died so young at 64. And apparently it was necessary to him to achieve this level of consciousness. So what do you make of this?
But didn't he smoke a lot? Nicotine is a very strong stimulation of the brain.
So you don't need the sugar, you can just inhale a cigarette and that's it?
You can do it in any way. You can drink, or you can eat, or you can use nicotine. And apparently you stimulate the reward center, but you also stimulate the reward center by just making a painting or a sculpture or doing science. We talk about the flow in the brain, and if you are really focused on one problem, you nearly forget to eat and you only want to do this. And actually you stimulate the same system, the reward system, which is stimulated by alcohol, nicotine and sex. So it's a very simple system, but now due to evolution we have reached a higher level, and I think as Jean-Cher has pointed out, I think there's a drive for humans. We enjoy looking at paintings, we enjoy listening to music, and this is part of this stimulating factors of the reward system.
Well, when you speak of reward, I have two things to say. For one thing, Giacometti was never satisfied. So the drive, as he explained it, was to be satisfied, except that he was never. And the other thing on the part of the viewer is that you say, and Jean-Pierre Changeux says, that it's rewarding to look at painting or sculpture. But I don't think it's that rewarding to look at Giacometti's art, because it's very demanding and questioning, and it's not easy.
First of all, why did he continue? He must have been rewarded by just doing it. But the point is that he wanted to have he has had a very strong desire to represent the truth. But he wasn't satisfied, because maybe there was some problems when he had some idea how to perform. For any artist, you have some idea to perform something, the perfect work or the perfect piece of art or perfect piece of music. But you are not satisfied. So you are always dissatisfied. But you want real truth. Picture of the world.
So while he was making it, he was satisfied, but then he looked at it and was not satisfied. Is that?
Yes, and then he had to make a new turn, and I mean, it's little also like competition. You are not satisfied when you get the silver medal; you want the gold medal.
Well, I suspected that, so thank you, Hugo. And another thing I would like to add about the strange reward for the viewer is something happened in 1978 at the Fondation Mag in Saint-Paul-de-Vence. One guard in the foundation was caught. It was out of the opening hours, and he was alone in a room, and he suddenly got mad because he had all the paintings looking at him, and they suddenly came alive, which actually was a good tribute to Giacometti, because he wanted very much art to be alive. But then what he did, this guard, he took his lighter out and burned the pictures where the eyes were. And this is, to me, interesting in terms of how art can be very active. You know, the reward that you're talking about seems to me not complex enough. Am I right?
Yes, certainly. I think, for example, the center or the brain center for love is very closely related to the center for hate. We have this dualism, so I can certainly imagine that you have feelings to destruct things and you have feelings to construct, and actually it's fairly close to each other, from which this the nerve circuits from where these feelings are produced.
So the reward would not be only pleasure, but the stimulation itself, whether good or bad?
Certainly. I mean, you can be rewarded if, for example, by revenge.
Have you ever felt revenge in front of an artwork, Hugo?
I couldn't hear.
Have you ever felt revenge or a desire for revenge in front of an artwork?
Maybe. I think that's. I think, for example, hatred and revenge. I mean, it's certainly also a very important factor for creativity. I mean, I'm, for example, I need to be angry or to write an article, for example, if I want to, and that's certainly also very rewarding.
Interesting. I never thought about this, to tell the truth.
No, but I'm sure it's a lot of authors and...
So you work up an anger and then you're able to write, is that it?
Yes.
Wow.
I had some other...
I would like you to tell me a little more about dreams, because dreams are very important in the constitution of Giacometti's mind. Giacometti was born in a Swiss family in the mountains, and he was the son of a painter, and he came from a family where obviously culture was everywhere and discussed, and dreams are very important for them. They would share dreams, write to the dreams they had the night before, so he was brought up in this way. And of course, when he came to Paris and then ultimately met with the Surrealist movement, he was very well prepared. So I want you to tell me a little more about the way our brain dreams.
I think the problem with dreams is that if you talk with neuroscientists today, they say that Freud destroyed the field because there was pseudoscience. But now I recently met a Harvard psychiatrist, Alan Hobson, and he's now trying to look on dreams from a scientific point of view. It's not so easy. For example, one question is, are you conscious when you are dreaming? In some way you are conscious about what's happening, but there's some kind of inhibition, so you don't do what you are planning, what you're thinking of when you are dreaming. Another thing which I think is quite interesting, that even if you have a handicap, if you are paralyzed or blind or whatever, you don't, when you are dreaming, you are not that. You are seeing or you are moving. So there's...
How can you dream you're moving if you've never experienced moving?
Now you can dream that you are moving or you are active, dancing or whatever, but you are not dancing because the movements are inhibited, but at another level. And the other thing is that during dreaming, you are not self-aware. The self-awareness is lacking, and but it's a kind of pseudo consciousness, and there are certainly also some indications that you can learn during dreaming, particularly infants. If you play words or whatever, they seem to remember them when they are dreaming.
Another thing Giacometti tried to do is to mingle the time he was living, just being awake, and the time he was dreaming, so that he would come to have certain visions that would even scare him. Mm-hmm. One of the visions you can see on page 156. It's a vision that Giacometti had in a glade in Switzerland, in the mountains. And he saw the trees suddenly turn into standing people. And he saw the stones that were on the ground becoming heads. And I suppose this was very scary, to come to this awareness or capacity of having dreams enter your life when you're awake. Can you explain a little more? Because he was not using any drugs or anything, so how can one get to this point?
Was he daydreaming, or was it during the night? Or?
No, he had some visions, from what he says. He had visions.
If I speculate a little, we talk about synesthesia in particularly artists. So the brain is in some way connected incorrectly. So, for example, when they are during early life in fetus, we have nerves which goes from the eyes to the brain, which process hearing, and nerves which goes from the ears to the vision center. And it has been proposed that some artists, they have these wrong connections, and that's the reason why they make very unexpected paintings or figures. So, but this is very speculative. As I said in the beginning, I think it's so difficult to reduce what's happening for the artist to a neuroscientific level.
I understand that, but I've researched into this synesthesia possibility, but for one thing, Giacometti didn't like music very much. He would not listen to it except for the records that his wife would put on in the next room, and that was basically it. And there is not one allusion in what he's written about perfumes, for instance. So he seemed to be very, very visual. So I don't think this is the right path.
But he read a lot.
Yes, memory was very important. Because he had visions also of people that he had not seen in a long time, and he would see them as if they were in the room. So this is another kind of vision he had.
Mm-hmm. No, I mean, certain people are they are very mute. They cannot enjoy music at all, and so there are certainly differences. But usually there's some relationship, for example, between the ability to enjoy music or play music and mathematics. So, but it's different in different persons. But I wonder if I can say a few words just on the cultural brain. Because I think this is a new concept, and let me show you. We had previously an idea that most of our behavior is determined by the genes, and but now the human has a very long childhood, and during this childhood it's very important how you stimulate the child during critical periods, how you open or close the 2-meter DNA thread. This was demonstrated by some Canadian scientists, showing that if the mouse mother, she's licking and grooming the pups or the offsprings a lot, these pups become much more developed when they are adults with regard to solving cognitive tests, finding a cheese in the labyrinth, etc., and more stress resistant, while mice which are neglected have a bad behavior. And I mean, this is natural. I mean, everyone thinks that. But the new thing is that they could show that it affects the genome, how you open or close the long DNA thread. But you can only do it during very critical periods. But this shows that, and this has also been confirmed in humans actually, so they have seen similar things on the DNA thread in persons who have been neglected as children.
When you say this has to be confirmed, do you mean that it is going to be confirmed?
No, it has been confirmed.
Okay.
You see, it exists also in human. But my point is that according to this figure you saw from nature, culture, religion, or whatever seems to...
Are you sure it's been confirmed every time? Because for one, Jean Genet, who was a friend of Giacometti, who became a very, very well-known writer, he was abandoned and not treated at all well when he was a child. Mm-hmm. And he turned out to be quite a person, so...
No, I mean, certainly a lot of children who have a bad background, they seem to develop completely normal or with a good progress. So,
but what about the fetus?
Now, but for example, if I take a preterm infant, we know that infants who are born preterm, and if they have a bad social background, or if the mother is alone and poor, etc., and maybe the father is a drug addict, then these children have a very bad prognosis compared with full-term babies who seem to be able to compensate for this social handicap. So particularly the extremely preterm infants, when you are born at a very early stage, and then combination with a bad social environment, that can be deleterious. On the other hand, if the preterm baby is born in a good family with parents trying to support the child and with intervention, etc., these children may develop very well. This is not so critical in babies who are born at normal time, probably because this critical period has to some extent passed. So you close the window. We talk about windows of opportunity. And I think the new thing is that you really open the genome, which we didn't think of before. Another example is, for example, learning languages, which you can't learn a mother tongue after 5 years, for example. Okay, I've talked a lot. Do you want to?
No. I'm thinking, because I read your book, obviously, before the conference, and I was kind of scared about this window of opportunity that you describe, because I'm the mother of 2, and I was having very, very bad feelings about what happened to my children in this window of opportunity, and I'm kind of afraid that I missed the window.
I don't think you should feel guilty, because I mean, usually it doesn't matter so much, but I mean, these biological changes, you have to have real severe situations. For example, there have been studies of the children from the Romanian orphanage, and I mean, they were completely neglected during Ceausescu's time, and when they came out and were adopted to American and British families, they made X-ray of the brains, and there were big holes in the brain. So in these cases, you really miss the opportunity. But I mean, normal.
So it's severe neglect.
Yes.
Then.
So to see these biological changes, you really have to be very tough.
Can you tell me a little more about the dark energy of the brain?
Yeah, I think this is fascinating. The dark energy, this is actually a metaphor to the universe. And then we can talk about the three Big Bang. And just a moment. We talk about the Big Bang making of the universe, origin of the universe, and we talk about the origin of life. But I think the third problem, which is as exciting, which was pointed out already by Thomas Mann, is how does consciousness emerge? How does the human mind emerge? And this is absolutely crucial in order to reflect on how the universe origin and life originates. So I think the Big Bang of the brain is very important. And then the dark energy, that's this inner monologue or stream of consciousness, which is so remarkable. You don't see it in, for example, reptiles, but you see it particularly in humans. And these are all the thoughts, memories, plans, good and bad thoughts, ideas, and probably very important also for when you are interpreting, for example, a piece of art or music. You need to fill in the information which is fairly limited. And this dark energy consumes a lot of energy to consume for this.
And why do you call it dark?
No, this is just, it was actually an American scientist, it was an article in Scientific American, because it's this dark energy of the universe which we don't know so much about, and we can talk about the dark energy of the brain, as I said, which consumes a lot of energy.
Well, thank you. I think we're done in time.
Thank you very much, Véronique. It was very interesting to talk with you.